My name is Kirsten Bennett, and I'm Senior Manager Strategic Projects in the Office of the Provost. I'm going to speak a little bit today about some of the institutional supports and resources for academic integrity and with the within the context of generative AI and how that has impacted some of our work. Before I begin, though, I'd like to ask each of our speakers today to maybe briefly introduce themselves before we get into our presentations. So in order that you'll hear from everyone, maybe we'll move to Leah next.
Sure. Okay. Hi, everybody. I know a few of you. My name is Leah Waffler, and I run the Academic Integrity Matters program out of the Student Learning Hub, and I'll explain a little bit more after what that is.
And next to Anita.
Thanks, Kirsten. So I'm Anita Chaudhary. I'm an assistant professor of teaching with the Department of English and Cultural Studies, and I am the faculty advisor on academic integrity here at the UBCO Okanagan campus. I'll keep it at that and pass it on to Raymond.
Hi, everyone. My name is Raymond Lawrence. I'm a professor of computer science. My research area is not AI, despite having a computer science. My research area is databases, and I'm the academic director for the Center of Teaching and Learning. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll begin by just talking a little bit about the approach here. Just a minute. Okay, UBC's approach to academic integrity. So UBC has taken an educative approach to academic integrity, emphasizing awareness of integrity across teaching and learning, providing resources and education to support faculty and students. So this is a collaborative approach that crosses multiple units, including faculties and schools, provost offices on both campuses, advisory groups, the Center for Teaching and Learning, the Student Learning Hub with the AIM program, the library, and is facilitated by an implementation team that's made up of representatives from several of these units. So this team works in collaboration with UBC Vancouver and has supported the development of a cross-campus academic integrity website that explains this institutional approach and contains information for faculty and students, academicintegrity.ubc.ca. So I'll be sharing that resource throughout the presentation. Both provosts' offices work collaboratively on UBC-wide initiatives related to academic integrity and the misconduct regulation. In terms of generative AI, a steering committee that's cross-campus has been struck and will be including a subcommittee on teaching and learning around academic integrity. So more to come in that area. So next, I wanted to talk a little bit just about the academic misconduct process and some of the recent developments in the last year that include a diversionary process. So just to talk through a little bit of the misconduct process. So as you can see here on this slide, there's a bit of an outline of a general process along the side. So in terms of this, if an incident of academic misconduct is identified, it usually occurs in the context of the classroom by the instructor or by the teaching assistant. If the misconduct is suspected, the instructor will, of course, review the case, meet with the student, and gather information. At that point, a decision is made as to whether misconduct has occurred, and this case needs to be forwarded on to further decision. So that first stage of instructor review and meeting moves to a departmental or program review, depending on the faculty, and then eventually to the dean's office. If the instructor decides that misconduct has not occurred, then of course it will be ended at that point. So at the level of the dean's office, this is where a further review and decision is undertaken. Usually a designate within the dean's office is responsible for misconduct. They will generally meet with the student again, review the case, and continue a further investigation. If at that point a decision is made that yes, misconduct has occurred, there are a few choices that are made at that point. If the dean decides that a particular case would benefit from an educative approach, for example, it's the student's first offense, it is a relatively minor offense or a mistake that the student has admitted to, and they're agreeing to work with the process to learn more about academic integrity, then this diversionary process may be a good option. So this is something that's agreed to by both dean and student to undertake the diversionary process, which is captured in an integrity plan. So this is a new part of the regulation that was revised in 2022, and some faculties have started piloting this within their processes. And so within a diversionary process, a plan to learn more about academic integrity may involve a referral to the Academic Integrity Matters program, which is run in the Student Learning Hub, which Leah will speak to a bit more as part of that process. If the case is more egregious, is intentional, is a second offense, or requires a more of a disciplinary approach, Of course, that would be referred to the President's Advisory Committee on Student Discipline, where the President would determine an outcome that would be disciplinary in nature. So that would be a more serious offense. So the regulation allows for the use of a diversionary process or a warning letter at the level of the discretion of the Dean's office, or a referral to the disciplinary process. There's a lot of information about this process on the academic calendar, as well as the Academic Integrity website for reference, and those links are included here. These slides can be shared with you after. So moving on to generative artificial intelligence and UBC's response in the context of academic integrity. So with the proliferation of artificial intelligence technologies, most recognizably ChatGPT, we've needed to respond quickly to these new challenges and how they've created nuances for academic integrity. So many resources have been developed through UBC and across Canadian institutions to support faculty and students on the use of generative artificial intelligence technologies, and conversations on this are still ongoing. I want to point to some key resources and guidance that has been developed in this area. So UBC's response is much in line with other Canadian institutions. There's been a movement toward a measured and balanced approach that doesn't outright ban the use of these technologies, but allows for their intentional and attributed application when appropriate. So at UBC, the use of AI technologies is a course or program level decision. Support in this area emphasizes communication and clarity around acceptable use, creating student awareness and considerations for curriculum and assessment design. The Academic Integrity website and the Centre for Teaching and Learning have resources that are linked here on this particular page. The Academic Integrity website also has a ChatGPT Q&A, so it has a lot of key questions and answers around what's been decided so far, or what recommendations have been reached at this point, which highlights some different scenarios that may come up around the appropriate use of generative AI. And there's also some sample language around communicating with students through the syllabus about generative AI permissions. So in all cases, it's important to communicate early and often to students about permitted or prohibited use and the reasons behind it. So what are the implications for academic misconduct? So while the use of artificial intelligence doesn't automatically equate to academic misconduct, it can be used to cheat. So if using ChatGPT or other generative AI tools in coursework is not allowed or prohibited by the instructor, then of course using these tools would be considered academic misconduct. If their use has been permitted, it would be really important for instructors to make sure to clearly communicate the limitations of use, how it should be acknowledged, and the way that use should stay within those boundaries. If it's not been discussed or mentioned at all, the assumption would be that it would be considered or could be considered academic misconduct, but clarification would be really important. So the academic calendar provides guidance on what is considered academic misconduct. The tools, artificial intelligence tools, are not specifically named in the regulation, but their use could be considered unauthorized means to complete an assignment, accessing a website that's not permitted, plagiarism, or other scenarios depending on the case. In terms of AI detectors, there's been a lot of conversation around the use of artificial intelligence or ChatGPT generated text detectors. So ChatGPT 0, Turnitin, OpenAI's text classifier are some tools that are out there. So even though these tools are available, it's important to remember they are maybe not fully tested. There is technology that's continuing to learn how to evade these testers, and the detectors are not foolproof. They can produce false negatives and false positives. For those reasons, UBC has recommended that the detection tools not be used as a sole factor in any decision-making around an allegation of academic misconduct. Privacy considerations also exist with some of these, where entering student work into a third-party site might create privacy concerns. So basically, there hasn't been enough experience with these systems and these detectors to be able to fully support faculty who want to use them. And also, there may be some value in reviewing the LT Hub statement on UBC's decision not to enable Turnitin's AI detection feature, which encapsulates some of those concerns that I've mentioned. So the recommendation really is to investigate inappropriate use of artificial intelligence technology in a similar way to other forms of misconduct. So in this slide, I've just pulled together a few key resources around academic integrity. Again, it's a lot of text to read on the screen, but maybe you'll have a chance to review a little bit later. Just some key information about where to find out more information. These are existing resources that anybody can access. Around the misconduct regulation, there's also the academic integrity website, which has a lot of information that links out to several other resources. For instructors and their role in the process, I just wanted to highlight the Office of the Ombudsperson for Students, which has an academic misconduct toolkit, which is a really valuable way to look through the process and the steps involved for investigating or dealing with a misconduct incident. And also to check with the faculty or department for specific faculty level processes that are in place. There are resources for integrating academic integrity content and conversations into courses and assignments, and there's some links here. There's an initiative called Take 5 for Academic Integrity, which is under Awareness in UBC Classrooms, where there's some pre-made content that introduces concepts of academic integrity and generative AI to sort of spur a conversation in class. The AIM program has facilitators who could come in and support, which Leah will speak to. In terms of where to send students for support, again, Leah will speak a bit more about the Academic Integrity Matters program and the Student Learning Hub. And I'd also wanted to highlight the Academic Integrity Digest, which is a quarterly newsletter that's put out by provost offices on both campuses to keep everyone up to date, to share resources and respond to timely issues around academic integrity. So please feel free to use the QR code to sign up or seek us out later. And I just wanted to pass it over to Leah for the next thing.
Thank you. So my name is Leah Waffler. I run the AIM program out of the library, and we help students learn about best practices for academic integrity. So we have some students who seek us out just for help on their own when they have questions, but we also have a lot of students referred to us. You'll see we've been quite busy the last 3 years, and last year we had 188 students come through the program. They all got one-on-one help either through me or an Academic Integrity Matters consultant who are student staff members at the Student Learning Hub. Our main goal is to kind of answer questions for students, clarify what can be often a very confusing area of study. And so faculty can refer students directly to the program. We get a lot of referrals from the associate deans as part of the integrity plans that Kirsten explained. So there is the link there to check out if you want to find out more about how to refer a student. I wanted to share in particular that we did add some new content on use of AI tools onto our Canvas courses that we share with students. And I just looked today, and we've had a lot of students go through it already, and they've all been doing very well on the quizzes. So a lot of that's just kind of reiterating what Kirsten explained in terms of understanding how to act when AI tools have been kind of permitted, when they haven't been addressed, or when they've been said like to not use them, and how to kind of navigate what can often be different expectations amongst faculty or amongst courses. And instructors can assign the AIM courses for credit in their class. And so you can reach out to the email address there if you're interested in doing that and uploading them onto your course. But yeah, so I'll keep it short, but I'm sure if we have time for questions at the end, if you have more questions about the program, I'm happy to answer them. And I'll pass it off to Anita. Thank you.
So I wanted to take a step further into where Kirsten and Leah kind of put us at, with lots of good information and resources on academic integrity, where the institutional policy and the website itself lives, and what kind of material can be taken into classrooms as well. Now, to engage with that material a little further, not directly, but indirectly, I begin in this section with posing a few questions that perhaps are commonplace, perhaps you have already thought, given that we have started a new term with generative AI very much in our minds, and move on to some commonplace challenges. And I'm calling them commonplace intentionally because we have been talking about challenges of using tools such as GPT a whole lot, and therefore commonplace. But then the realization of that commonplace or those challenges will be very different as we really apply them in our classrooms this term. Or if you have already done so, I would be absolutely privileged to hear from you on those. Next, I present or bring to our conversation today two educative approaches, given that we are thinking about application of generative AI, not just for the challenges they present, but also for the opportunities that we have before us, and end with a brief review of assessment types that may be considered. So to begin with, the questions I was thinking, and I really come here with using myself as an example, a case scenario for how I am approaching and intentionally bringing AI or generative AI into conversation, and therefore these questions. So the first one, can generative AI support course learning objectives and engagement in my class? And depending on how one reacts to this question or responds to it, your stance on the use of generative AI or the academic integrity policy that you determine for your classroom will need to be tweaked or changed. Next, what are some of the ways in which generative AI facilitates teaching in my course? Recognizing that I come from a discipline perhaps very differently placed than you are, there are definitely ways in which I can utilize generative AI tools such as ChatGPT in my teaching practice. I focus on teaching communication and rhetoric, and there are opportunities where multimodality really features in my class plan, the assignment types that I offer. And but that may be very differently placed for you. The third one here, can I prepare my students to use generative AI effectively? The point I'm trying to draw your attention to here is the word effective, and also the fact that it needs preparation. So I need to be able to not only ask or allow students to use generative AI, but really tell them what about it is useful for the class or the course that they are part of, and in what ways they might be effectively bringing it into conversation with the different assessment types that I have planned out for the course. The fourth question here says, how do I define responsible behavior? And Kirsten and Leah both really effectively presented how the institution offers these different definition types around academic integrity, and how the Academic Integrity Matters program brings the students into the fold and helps them understand the different aspects of misconduct. But how do I define and bring it to context in my own courses might be slightly differently placed, might have a specific flavor depending on the discipline that I am presenting before the students. And therefore, there is good reason to think about what constitutes responsible behavior in my discipline or area of interest. Next, do I need to rethink assessment practices to allow the use of tools such as ChatGPT? And this is to recognize that there's a lot of rethinking and reviewing and rehashing of practices that we have been considering, discussing in different forums such as this one. And hopefully assessment practices have changed your own over time. But getting back into rethinking about assessment practice and effective use of the tool and where in the assessment the tool really fits in. And finally, having or holding discussion with students. What do my students know and think about the use of generative AI? And can that help in answering some of these questions? Because needless to say that much like faculty members we sit and talk about in these forums about the use of generative AI, students are also concerned about how their work will be perceived or received and then assessed based off what may read like text generated by ChatGPT versus the way or style, the academic writing style that they follow in their own writing practices. Moving on from some questions to the next step about challenges, and I highlight two specific kinds, you could call them, or there are very many different types included in these short paragraphs. One is a quote. So the first one reads, consider how the use of tools such as ChatGPT may challenge learning, given that we know that the tool scores poorly on reliability, on truthfulness, imitates information, and synthesizes chunks of knowledge that may highlight biases. And these are things that we are familiar with. Biases or incorrect attribution. Missing attribution may also be the case, but incorrect attribution has come up frequently in conversation. And finally, lacks the ability to reason, and reason in a very deep-rooted sort of a fashion, to be able to make connection between different types of, it could be different genres that students may choose to use in writing their papers, but it could also be the different article types or authors that they are bringing into their writing. And I'm talking more about writing, but this could very well apply to speech acts or situations where they are trying to present a case on their topic of choice. And therefore, meaning making itself may be lacking in such circumstances, or just be very superficial in the connections that are laid out. The next one, the yellow one that I have on the slide here, is a quotation from Yao 2023. And I must say that since I am engaged with speakers of other languages, English speakers, also in my classroom spaces, but definitely looking very closely at the writing skill and the writing process they bring into the classroom to be able to communicate effectively. And the rhetoric behind it is a big concern for us. Therefore, this quotation, and I hope you're able to draw from it and kind of, think a little bit or connect it with your own disciplinary scopes. So the quotation, and I read it aloud here: although these tools may take the pain out of research and the writing process, they deprive learners of the opportunity to develop academic writing skills and the cognitive, linguistic, and socio-emotional competencies that they could gain through employing and experiencing authentic processes of academic writing. So the struggle itself, that's something I read into the quote. And finally, Yao says, most of all, students are denied opportunity for self-expression and creativity. So oftentimes our conversations are situated at how easy now it is for students to be able to sign into ChatGPT or buy into a particular generative AI tool and utilize it to write their assignments. But then it's also talking about and really engaging them in the conversation of why and when to use these tools effectively, and how it constitutes not just an aspect of misconduct, but also about their own learning in terms of how their voice and ownership comes into play, and how those may be affected as a result of overuse of these tools. The next slide said I go into educative approaches, and I borrow from, and in fact bring to you, two different researchers who have been working very elaborately in the field of academic integrity. The first one is Sarah Eaton, and her work in academic integrity related to equity is of particular importance here when we are talking about generative AI, because it's not just about making a tool available or not, but it's also about what's the purpose behind it, and how in not using these tools, we may be creating a space that lacks compassion, that lacks or impacts equitable learning in certain ways. And therefore, the aspects that Sarah Eaton brings up in her 2022 work, first is about learning. And I'm just going to go ahead and go through my animations here and perhaps talk through them next. So the first one is about learning, and I'm interpreting this as learning with the students, learning to understand what generative AI is and how they can be used in the classroom spaces. Advocacy has to do with advocating for the use of certain tools in parts, maybe, or limiting the use of certain tools, and why. So advocacy could also be about really walking or talking with students about the importance of their voice and presentation of that voice in their own work, the ownership of their own texts and assignments that they submit and what that looks like. Restorative focus in academic integrity is frequently talked about, and I interpret it here in terms about really restoring faith in the teaching and learning process that you are bringing into your classrooms, and creating meaningful partnership with students. So it's not, the onus is not just on us. Yes, we are creating or presenting course outlines for them. Nonetheless, that outline soon enough becomes a partnership-based document where I'm laying out certain expectations, but those that follow-up has to happen from the students, and conversations need to be held. And that's where innovation and collaboration comes into play. And generative AI really offers us a huge opportunity to innovate with the practices that we are so used to, and how we collaborate, not just with our students, but even within students, the peer opportunities or peer review workshops and such that may be held in your classroom spaces, how those conversations are now held. Equity in policy language. Policy itself is something that Kirsten has referenced with the website, the institutional policy. It's a good idea to bring that up in the classroom to show how generative AI fits into the policy language and how it is being read or institutionally perceived or received and related to your classroom opportunities. The EDI focus is important. So it's not just equity, but also the diversity of voices sitting in your class, as well as the inclusive practices that you may be including in your classroom practice that needs to be discussed and laid out very clearly. Ownership and voice is something I have referenced before. I wouldn't repeat it, but definitely can talk about it more if a question comes up. And inclusion, how am I including the use of newer practices, technologies in the classroom so that my students graduate out of it feeling empowered to use or make choices and decisions that are effective rather than misinformed. So that's where I'm going to read inclusion with Sarah Eaton's work. The next one I talk about is from Braytag et al. Braytag worked elaborately in academic integrity. So the 5 elements of exemplary AI policy, this particular work that I reference, focuses very much on the policy itself, but I'm kind of trying to reinterpret it, given that the landscape is very much situated on generative AI and what are we doing about it? How am I bringing it into my classroom practice? So Access, as far as the article itself is concerned, Access helps us question where is the policy located, and we have an amazing UBC academic integrity website. Approach has to do with how is academic integrity approach or applied in diverse contexts with diverse students. Support, how does one enact the policy? What kind of support or resources are available to you as faculty members, as well as students if they face misconduct, challenges of academic misconduct. Responsibility, who is responsible? Who do you contact in terms of the resource person and is able to guide you through the academic integrity process itself? And finally, the details, the reporting process and the details. But I'm going to walk away from exactly what Braytag says and rather look or interpret it or utilize the filter of assessment here a little bit and talk about generative AI. So I'm interpreting Access here as using generative AI tools to engage students about their applicability. So an example could be comparative analysis of texts that they create, they write, they prepare in classroom versus texts that are created, generated using ChatGPT, for instance, and being able to compare the two and really engaging a conversation. It could be based on grammar. It could be based on other aspects of how language styles have changed, or ChatGPT has presented the style in different ways, and why. Approach, I interpret as utilizing process-based approach. So a portfolio of work instead of focusing on final products only is useful to consider. Support has to do with co-creating space with students alongside and bringing them into the discussion so that the use of generative AI can be considered, and that you are providing reasons for why it has been or it hasn't been. So the responsibility of acknowledging and attributing even the use of ChatGPT is important. So the use of style guide at the very basic level is an aspect one can, use or exemplify responsibility or responsible practice. And finally, detail that emerges out of your grading criteria. So discussing grading criteria in terms of understanding how the use of generative AI in formative practices perhaps will be recorded as part of assessment. And I have recorded in quotation only to recognize that, and yet another opportunity of an assignment could be to screen capture how students use tools, generative AI tools, and bring them into their practice to be able to hold conversation, as well as for you to be able to decide on criteria, grading criteria around them. I think that's where I stop with my presentation. I have the references and happy to share the slide set with you. Over to you, Raymond.
Can I just jump in real quick? I just put in the chat, Anita mentioned Sarah Eaton's work, and I have here, for those of you in the room, a book that she wrote, Plagiarism in Higher Education, that our library owns, and you can check it out after we return it today, and I put that reference also in the Zoom.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the lunch hour. I think this is such an important topic, so thank you for taking your time out of the day to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about assessment in the era of AI. I'm speaking in my dual role as academic director, but also as an instructor. I just had my first class, and I can give you some on-the-ground experience right away. That just happened yesterday. So two objectives I have that I'm going to briefly talk about is to talk about how assessment techniques are affected by AI and how that affects academic integrity based on those assessment techniques. And then, especially if you're an instructor, reflect on how your assessments could either be resistant to AI in academic integrity issues or may need some changing based on what your learning outcomes are. So the questions we're going to ask and answer are basically three levels of questions. The first thing I'm going to make a statement is, I don't think assessment should dramatically change because of AI. I know there's a lot of fear in the air because it is new, but we are encountering these same problems before. Students could have outsourced their assignments or their writing before AI existed. It's just AI is a little bit easier to make that happen. So questions to ask is, why are you doing this assessment? What are your learning priorities? I think the most important thing is students must believe in the importance of the material and the assessment that you're doing. You want to convince them to care. You don't want to be going through the academic integrity process if you can avoid it, because that takes a lot of time and it's not good for the student. Convince them ahead of time that, no, you don't want to go down that path because what you're learning is important. The what is your assessment should align with your defined course and program learning outcomes. If you don't have those, you'll want to think about what those objectives are and what those assessments should be. And I'm going to also talk a little bit about the how you deliver the assessment, whether it's paper, computer, or in person, and the technology used does have a dramatic impact depending on AI and academic integrity. So that's something to spend a little bit of time talking about. There's multiple ways of assessing people. It just doesn't have to be quizzes and exams. It might be assignments, might be writing. Things that people are looking at a little bit more closely in the era of AI is interviews. If you can scale, talk to the student. Can you do skill-based assessments? Can you actually have them demonstrate in front of you or a TA that they've mastered that? That's a way of making sure they know it rather than AI. So as scary as it is, I'm a computer person and I like my computer-based exams. Unfortunately, I have to say the safest assessment in the era of AI is a paper-based exam because they don't have access to the AI, and however you want to deploy that. Computer-based exams, there are ways of doing it, and I refer to the CTL report that we've investigated some various technologies. But anytime the student has their own device, realize that they may have access to other resources, not just AI, which may affect your assessment. So things to consider. So why is the AI a little bit scarier than the other things that came before? Many of you are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. I'm going to put forward to you that Internet and Google had already solved the bottom two. So if you were asking them fact-based retrieval questions, the Internet does that better than we can. And so that was already possible before the AI that we're seeing now. Even the next two levels of analyze and apply, there is specific resources out there that students could draw upon before the AI revolution, whether it's web forums, Chegg. If you're doing anything mathematics, Wolfram Alpha will solve your calculus questions for you. I know it because I was helping a first-year student do it on that particular tool. So it's not like it's totally novel what's out there. But what's scaring people is generative AI, ChatGPT as an example, can do those next two levels. You can ask it to evaluate or argue a position. You can ask it to create original work. I mean, it's not perfect. It may make up some stuff, but it can do a pretty good job on creating things. Generally, people are thinking of like a B-level, A-level student for writing essays or doing material. And that is a little bit scary because that might change how you're assessing people, especially in the writing domain. So once again, how does our technology change these learning outcomes? I would actually ask, as an instructor, you should ask the question, should they be learning and am I assessing them the same way I was before? Like if your assessments were on those bottom two levels, we've known for a long time that fact recall is being replaced by internet searches. People that work on a daily basis, if you don't remember anything, you go look it up. I mean, that's a real world solution right now for that. So why are we asking our students to memorize all these facts that they know they're just going to look them up in other contexts anyways? Similarly, we have to various levels right now digital assistants that help us do things. Even if you're using Outlook right now or various tools, it'll autocomplete your sentences while you're writing. This is just going to keep on getting better on what it can do. And students realize that. We want them to be able to use that to improve their work efficiency. Now at the top level, the generative AI can produce new insights, new writing, or at least rephrase what you have done. So I'm a big believer on trying the technology so you understand what's happening. So in the latest CTL newsletter, I wrote out what I wanted to say. And everyone, I know I have a very scientific, very not flowery writing style. I said, you know what? I pasted everything I wrote into ChatGPT and I said, make this better. That was my query. It made this better. I told it to my wife and she goes, oh, the AI is way better than yours. So I go, okay, I will edit it. I will do attribution that I co-edited with the AI. And that's what I submitted to the newsletter. All there was my content, but it was done in a better way. And so we do have to think about, for our students, that's going to be the reality. These tools are there. So as instructors, we have to figure out, well, how does that fit into the content I have and how do I want to deploy it? So before I do the summary, real world, I just did my third-year database course, 230 students. Normally takes me only about 5-7 minutes to go through academic integrity. Probably took me about 25 minutes in this class for a variety of reasons. They had a lot of questions. Is this allowed or is that not allowed? And it was in the syllabus, but you have to clarify it. The other thing is I actually demonstrated on my lab, my fun question, I took it, I pasted into ChatGPT just like a student would do. And I went through the discussion. Actually, this time I got it wrong. Most of the time it gets it right, but I got it wrong. And it was a good indication to say, this is some of the challenges. And this is why I don't want you to use it for the assessments, because then what are you going to learn? That was my message. ChatGPT is great at SQL, which is my topic. If you're not, then the company would hire the AI rather than you. So once again, coming down to the motivation. 85% of that class had already used generative AI in some form, just so you see what has already been done. And they were very interested on applying it in certain ways. So my response is, for some of the assessments, I say no. For the last assessment, I said, you can do whatever you want. Build the best website database in my course that you can do. So the key thing as instructors is figure out what your key learning outcomes are. Realize this technology is not going away and it will be a system to people's work in the future. And the challenge is figuring out that balance and communicating it effectively so the students don't come into academic integrity issues. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. And now we're to open it up to Q&A. All those questions that you have been burning, that you're showing up to ask during the session. If you do not want to be recorded, you can type your question into the chat to the whole group or just to me, and I will ask it out loud. So while people may be chatting, and you can also raise your hand, and then if you want to unmute to ask a question out loud. While people may be typing away on Zoom asking their question, I will maybe open it up to the room. What comments, questions?
So my students do evidence-based analysis, and they have to quote from the text that I have had them buy for the course, and they have to cite words and page numbers. Would they still be able to use ChatGPT in that context?
In some levels. So what you can do is you can basically give it a context. So for instance, you would paste some of your text that you have as part of the prompt, and then ask it to whatever you want, generate something. And it will use that prior information you give it in generating its answer. And the different versions have different ability to do that, but in general, that's the technique. Now, would it come back and be good at quoting the exact page and reference number? That's a known thing it's not very good at. It'll make up references, sometimes mathematical formulas, because remember what's actually happening here. I'm a database person, so a database has facts. You look up facts and it gives you a fact. What generative AI does, it's trained on a whole bunch of data, but it doesn't look it up. It makes it up as it goes. And generally it's good, but sometimes it's not. And so that's one thing to understand about the technology. So it could do some of it, but your students will have to have that critical thought. And actually, I think that is beneficial. When I looked at my text and this text, I go, well, that's not my style, but I do love that on how they wrote it. And I think we want our students to have that compare and contrast opportunities too.
Thank you.
We have a question here from Christina. I'll read it out so that we can also see that. Thank you very much for the fantastic presentation. Do you think that if students can use AI and get the example of A or B level answers, should there be more difficult assessment? I want to answer this, but I'm going to open up to the panel.
Can I go first, Anita?
Go for it.
I don't think you can. So over the summer, I took all the questions in the first 2 computer science courses. AI got 95 to 100%. You can't make those questions harder because that's the concepts. Even in my 3rd year course, it was scoring about 80% and what I think are hard questions. So there's no way I can make them harder. The only thing you can do is convince them that they have to do it rather than the AI. I don't think you can modify the assessment to make it harder. In many domains, maybe in yours you can, but then you got to think about what is that doing to the student if that assessment is so hard, and what's their feedback going to be from that.
And I agree with that, Raymond. And I would only say that it may not become difficult, but the pace of it may increase. So, for instance, in a first year writing course that I've taught, we've had summaries. So writing summary, that has become an easier task now if a student chooses to use any of these spin bots, not even going into very sophisticated generative AI tools, but I think the important thing for me as I, think about these classrooms or how I would be teaching such a course next is to recognize that there are certain things that have become easier for them to do. And that's not a problem at all. That's a good thing. But it gives me the scope to bring in additional material into the classroom and perhaps increase the pace of learning. Perhaps they're able to go through more material than they would have in a previous pre-generative AI phase. So that may be considered depending on the discipline. But I think it's also equally important to consider what your course learning outcomes are. And if making things difficult might not really fit with the learning objectives that you have set up for the class.
Great, yeah, great points. And just to reiterate, what is the purpose of your assessment, right? Is it to make it difficult, so that you don't, not everybody gets all A's or whatever, like what is your purpose? To really tie it back to those skills and competencies that you want them to achieve. And I would say to design your assessments, perhaps that they're build on one another or allow learners to see that learning as a process. And then they can, they're contributing each time and seeing that they're progressing in their skills and they're having to use the information that they used before. And then they feel that, yes, I can do this. I don't have to go out and use generative AI because I do have the skills. I see that there's support here if I need it. So really thinking about that learner-centered approach is also very useful, because it will deter the students that feel like, I can't do this, it's too hard, I want to find a way to have generative AI or somebody else do it for me. So great. Other questions from the group here or online? Feel free to raise your hand.
I just wanted to add to what you mentioned, Barbara, and it's really valuable to consider what students find hard, and Raymond also mentioned, and that's very directly connected with the kind of stats that Leah shared with the number of students who come through the Academic Integrity Matters program, but that's not the number of students who get into the whole academic misconduct process and are penalized at the very worst ways possible. So it's important to recognize that, and in conversations with students, I've recognized that they too are worried about how their work will be perceived. And the reason behind, Raymond spending 25 minutes instead of 5 was because the students had questions. So really my experience so far has been students want to really understand and carefully align themselves with the expectation, institutional as well as course-based. That creates a whole area to bring up the discussion with them. Thank you.
Great, and maybe let's see more questions, but I have some questions on people when they registered. Some people put some questions in.
Before you do that, I would just like to follow up. I think it's important, because we're talking mostly about academic integrity, that we realize we want to treat our students as being honest. We don't want to get into an arms race of AI and detectors and us against the students, because that's not what it is. It's about, we decide what the learning objectives are, which admittedly might change with AI, but we decide what they are and we assess fairly. And if you do that, students will buy in. And what we want to do is have that sort of mentality, not trying to make things harder, not trying to trick people, not trying to detect, because it just doesn't work. We also did the research on that, and you just can't find it. Some level you can, but not at the level that you would want to be accusing people of that. And those false positives are even more damaging in a way, because that affects students' experience who were being honest. So I think that's important to really emphasize here.
There's a tiny piece that maybe we can still comment on. Somebody asked as an instructor, what do I do if I suspect AI was used for an assessment? can I use a detector? What proof do I have that AI misconduct occurred? So we've talked about that, no, there is no detection that's reliable. We don't want to go that route, but maybe there's something that you want to re-emphasize around that question?
Yeah, I've seen quite a few assignments now over the past year that had suspected AI use, and it's kind of difficult because the people who are using it just to generate content, once you become familiar with it, it's pretty easy to usually tell. But again, that's more of just a feeling. There's not really a black and white kind of ability to say yes for sure. Imagining what prompts they gave and asking ChatGPT to produce that usually gives you stuff that's quite similar, but again, that's just kind of a comparison. Most of the students that came through AIM ended up acknowledging that they used it when having a discussion with the instructor, so that can be an effective way, is sitting down with the student. But in the end, that's only catching students who are using it just to produce the content. And there's much more effective ways to use these tools to produce stuff that I don't think would be identifiable in that way. So in the end, you end up maybe penalizing the students who aren't great at using the tools yet, and not the ones who are using it maybe quite effectively. So that's kind of the hard kind of point. I don't know if you've
I agree. I think you can catch the blatant cheaters, like the people who copy assignments off Chegg directly. If they don't edit the AI text, you have a feeling of what that writing looks like. But once again, it's a feeling. And so what that means as an instructor, you have to have the communication. Think about that. If you have, like I do, a class of 230, I don't want to have 230 separate communications on suspected AI. It has to happen up front and not have them after the fact. Like, you can sort of detect it as a human, but you're not clear. And anyone who's smart can start to edit whatever that is, and then the detection really goes down in accuracy. In which case, then it comes down to the same thing you did before. Did you copy off this person? Did you copy off the internet? It's the same conversation, just a different data source, if you will, where the student may have got that material from.
Yeah, went to a conference this summer and they put up there was lots of presentation on Generative AI, and they put up a few writing samples and had us try to, could you tell if this is written by AI or not? And depending on the extent of people had actually used the tool themselves, they're able to say, oh yes, this is kind of the structure, reminds me. But we weren't sure, and the majority were off. So I guess bottom line, don't waste your energy and time on that. But as we've been talking about, we said, have that conversation on the first day, have it again before an assignment, be clear in your syllabus, what you allow and you don't allow, and then have that time for that conversation, I would say.
Yeah. I think encouraging students to be transparent from the beginning. So if you allow use of it, setting expectations for them to submit the output, or have like some instructors suggest like a disclosure statement, so like a written description on how they used it. We often in AIM talk with students about kind of going with their gut feeling. So we usually say, well, would you tell your instructor how you use this tool, or would you tell your instructor how you completed the assignment? And usually students immediately kind of get that like, ooh, like I don't think I would. And we go, okay, well, like listen to your gut, because that's usually going to get you the farthest. So if you encourage students to be honest about stuff and give them an avenue to kind of express how they use the tool, that probably is, they're less likely to maybe use it in a way that they're not as comfortable sharing. So you give them those avenues to have those discussions. So most of the students we had in the last year their instructor hadn't had any discussion about AI with them. There was nothing in the syllabus that specifically named ChatGPT. So in the end, they just weren't really sure. So actually saying, well, if you use it to generate content, that is misconduct in my class, letting them know what the repercussions are, probably will give them a lot more guidance, rather than them just being like, well, maybe I'll try it out this year, and justifying that by giving them avenues to say, well, I did try it out, this is how I did it, and I'm comfortable telling my instructor that. Probably going to be a bit more productive.
Raymond, you say with respect to the syllabus, recommended syllabus language that is being developed?
So
where-
UBC's already released recommended syllabus language related to generative AI and academic integrity. I don't know how that's distributed. Kirsten, can you
Yeah.
answer that?
Currently, there's a link on the academic integrity website that has syllabus language samples. Again, they're to be adapted and interpreted for context, but a few examples for different use cases that could be a starting point for instructors. Again, they're just there as a suggested method, as I think there's still a lot of different applications and different ways that AI is being interpreted for courses. There's no set formulaic language. It's just some suggested options that other instructors may have used or submitted.
Even if you don't use the standard ones, you should have some
Should have
language
some
that's there, that's clarified for the students.
And I think it should be explicit to name what is and isn't misconduct.
Mhm.
Not just saying, well, I don't find that it's good for your learning. I think that's effective, but adding on and saying kind of these are the boundaries. Because when it comes down to it and you have an assignment that you see and you go, oh, I don't know if I can grade this fairly in comparison to the other students, or I think they've used it a bit too much. Are you going to be able to say, am I confident that the student was aware of what the boundaries were at the beginning and not just kind of enacting that retroactively? Because when you get into that vague area where you go, maybe the student thought this, then it's going to be difficult to pursue any sort of reporting, or it might not be fair to the student in that situation.
We have 1 minute. Question.
Do you have any suggestion for grad studies?
I'll just say quickly that I would probably be suggesting that the students be looking at the journals in their fields and looking at the expectations of the publications would be expecting in terms of disclosure, and of course citing it. But I guess it would probably be up to their supervisor and their committee on what might be appropriate use. I don't know what you.
I think that's a fabulous question, because somebody might have a great research topic, but they can't write very well. And so is it allowed to have generative AI make it better? I don't know. With attribution, I think we're going to go there. It's just, I think everyone's got to figure out what that looks like, whether it's referencing or citing, but I think that's where it's going to go. It's going to be embedded in your word processor and you won't even know it after a while that you can take advantage of these features.
Oh, the way Microsoft Word already makes suggestions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll just keep going far. It'll just kind of blend in. And then the question is that an issue with your research writing, whether it's a report or your thesis? It probably won't be, but right now we're going down that path and we're trying to figure out what that looks like in terms of attribution.
I think some faculty mentors would appreciate not having to do so many rounds of edits on those thesis dissertations, right? So, but again, we're still at the beginning of that. I just realized we are scheduled, we still have another half an hour for conversation. So, I mean, have to say, but I could pull out a few more questions with the people that registered. This is kind of relevant to what we've been talking about. Somebody asked about take-home written assignments, right? That they're important learning tools that give students opportunities to reflect and revise drafts of their writing. How can we design take-home assignments in the context of ChatGPT?
That should be a question for Anita, I would think.
Yeah, and I thought, what a perfect question. Indeed, I think using ChatGPT or not using ChatGPT is a conversation to be had for sure. And clarifying that with every assignment is important for take-home aspects. If I'm allowing the use of ChatGPT-like tools, then I might expect recording their device, their screen, as they put together, plan out their assignment. And it could involve, so it makes very conscious effort at looking at the process of writing and preparing and brainstorming and planning it out, and then utilizing the different aspects of ChatGPT maybe and bringing it into the writing context. And really in-text citations wherever ChatGPT material has been used, so that there is, there clearly has to be a context and purpose behind that take-home assignment to keep that sacrosanct, but then talk or figuring out where the usages of generative AI based tools may be possible. And yeah, like screen capturing, Kaltura, that's something we have all used over the pandemic that's available to us. So there are different tech available at UBC, and it might be time to, really incorporate them, like involve students to use those same screen capture mechanisms and such for an assignment. And really, I teach in the area of multimodality, but multimodal learning styles is something that's not atypical or uncommon. And generative AI does facilitate how we can really look at writing assignments, but writing doesn't need to be pen and paper or typing things out on computer only. They can be video recording of certain kinds or texts in different genres. So how can we really evolve out of the assignments and the take-home types of writing-based assignments that we have used in the past and incorporate some of these tools that we are now familiar with?
Thank you, Anita. That's a great point. I think I'm also reminded with this question, Raymond's example of writing that the newsletter message, and how, yeah, you realized it's better, but what does that mean in the context of like academic writing, that you recognize it's better? And to ask the student also to actually pull out, like, I'm making a decision to change this sentence because of the structure, like actually have a dialogue, reflection, incorporating that reflective piece and explaining why they're making that decision about that sentence, that word choice. What was it? Having them actually analyze it would be really, really helpful for their own learning. Could be tied to specific learning outcomes that are expected from a course like that. And then that would be, they would get part of their grade, part of their assessment would be the points on that commentary, that reflection, to value that piece. So there's, I think, lots of opportunities. We need to think creatively about what we could do.
I think the writing, I'm not in writing, but in programming, it's sort of similar where you've got to write something down which does something. And what happens is in the labs, you write much longer things. And then on an exam situation, it's much shorter, which demonstrates what you could do. So with that being said, they might do the assessments on the labs with AI. You might not catch them, but if your real assessment is on a more closed situation, you have a valid assessment. So my feeling is, as an instructor, a take-home is not a good assessment in any domain. I'm going to just state that, because even before AI, you had no confidence that the student necessarily did it. Let's be clear, I believe 95% of them do it, but you don't have a confidence of that take-home modality for submitting an assessment in any form, and even less so with AI. So you should have a better backup assessment, or better assessment at the end somehow. That's what I'd be thinking, regardless what domain you're on. So I don't know how you do it in writing. Can you do writing in 2 hours and condense all those learning outcomes in some way? That would be a better assessment than having them take it home. The take home is building the skills. It's not the assessment piece. That's where I would think about it.
Yeah, and contract cheating's always been a thing, and it's like AI, you can't necessarily prove it, like not like plagiarism where you could use Turnitin and actually have kind of the item to compare it to. So I always think it's interesting to think how it's quite similar, but the difference is the ability to afford it. And so now we have something that is free and is in a sense much more accessible. And now we have the panic, when before contract cheating was still a thing. It was just accessible to people who could shell out $300, $600 to purchase an essay. So now that it's more accessible to students, now we're a lot more concerned. So I always think that's something to think about, that maybe focusing on the final product. And this is coming from someone who's in English, that often it was producing the final product and less so focusing maybe on the iterations of it and the drafts and stuff. So maybe that's where we need to focus.
And just to add to that, I also love the idea of Creative Commons license types for student work and really making students aware that what they are producing, they are creating it, like they are creating that content and authorship is associated with that content. And therefore, Creative Commons license types can be and should be applied, especially I do use UBC blogs a whole lot to create these kind of public document sites. They are great examples that they set up for themselves as well as peers. And more importantly, it creates a body of work that they can continuously refer back. So assigning or encouraging them to assign a license types, kind of negotiates or brings them to the conversation that, are you sure you have created this product? Is the responsibility is an aspect to really deliberate on. And perhaps that's yet another way to look at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Yeah, great point. I don't see any more questions on Zoom, but there's one last kind of a positive question that I received previously. So most of the discussion on AI is addressing the negative impact. How about its positive impact on the learner, such as enabling a personalized learning environment? So just asking for more discussion on the AI's positive impact might be a nice way to end thinking about generative AI's positive potential.
I can go there first, Raymond. I see you on my screen here. There are lots of positives. I mean, just to think that the students who sit in our classrooms will be entering the professional space or continue on with their studies and still entering professional academic zones of practice. For them to know these tools is absolutely essential. For them to be experienced users of these tools is extremely important. For them to be able to hold a conversation about ChatGPT or generative AI and the things that work and that do not work in creating content is quite valuable. So I am in humanities, very much located there, a scholar practitioner, and ChatGPT affords me the capacity to look at different kinds or approaches to writing the same paragraph. Whether I take from it or not may be determined by, as mentioned before, an academic publication venue. It may be dependent on the genre that I'm trying to put into place, but it nonetheless facilitates different ways of writing or different word choices at the very basic level. So I think it's important for faculty members to bring that into conversation. And that's the big positive. There's something new to rejoice and talk about.
I agree. There's so many positives. In our domain, if you use the technology properly, you could be twice as efficient as a developer because it actually generates working code in many cases for you. Our students will need to be able to do those things. As an instructor, you can ask them to have ChatGPT generate practice questions. And I said, like, you can't do it for assessment, but you can take my questions and say, generate questions that look like this, and it will do it with answers. So there's things that can save us time and help students practice. It's very exciting, and the skill sets that they can get from it are very useful for them. So our challenge as instructors is how we integrate it, draw those boundaries in terms of how they use it for an assessment properly.
Great. Wonderful. Yeah, lots of uses, and there'll be, this is not the end of the conversation. There will be, do you have at the top of your head the date for the upcoming, do you have a date for the upcoming? We'll have a continuation of our Generative AI.
I don't have the date, but I know there's some planning in
I
the
know
works.
I think we had planned it for October. I think there'll be another one, so look for the CTL newsletter if you're not signed up yet. If you have an idea also, or you'd like to contribute, please reach out in the CTL, and we will incorporate you, invite you. This is part of the conversation that we like to continue, and we know it's evolving. We like to include not only instructors, but students as well. Look for more, but also we'll look for you to contribute as well. So thank you for joining us. We'll be sharing the slides and the recording once it's all ready to be posted to our CTL YouTube channel. So thank you and have a wonderful first week of the term.